stakes have risen. The Reich is hysterical. The President of the United States, just about an hour ago, came out and announced that Elena Kagan is going to be his nominee to take the seat of retiring Justice John Paul Stevens on the Supreme Court, positioning the court to have 3 female justices for the first time in its history. I think it could do well with 7 female justices or more. But in any case, this woman is only 50 years old. Now, I realize for many people, 50 is not only, but for the Supreme Court, 50 is a young'un. And, you know, Roberts was, what, 40 or 52 or 54 when he was appointed. In fact, she nearly took Roberts' seat on the D.C. District Court in 1999, the seat that eventually was filled by Roberts, and only didn't because when she was appointed by then President Bill Clinton in 1999 for that seat on the U.S. Appeals Court in Washington, D.C., which is considered the stepping-off point for the Supreme Court. People are put onto that court because the Federal Appeals Court in Washington, D.C. hears all these cases that involve the government, and therefore it's like, you know, okay, you're covering all these cases that involve the government. You'll be the guy who's going to, or the woman who's going to really understand the issues and all that kind of thing. And the Republicans refused to even hold a hearing. This is after the Gingrich Revolution, when the Republicans took control of the House and Senate during the Clinton presidency, and they said, nah, we're not even gonna listen, not even gonna talk about the pot. And I mean, they're doing it again. They got some 70, 80 Obama appointees held up. So anyhow, she's received bipartisan praise for her tenure as dean of the Harvard Law School. She would be the youngest member of the court. The last, by the way, she would be the first, not the first member of the court, but the first in 40 years of the High Court who doesn't have judicial experience. There's a plus and a minus to this. The minus, of course, is that she doesn't have judicial experience. The plus is that she doesn't have a long track record of decisions that right-wingers can go after. The last 2 justices appointed to the U.S. Supreme Court who didn't have judicial experience, who weren't judges before they were put on the court, were both appointed in 1972 by Richard Nixon. One was William Rehnquist, who comported himself well, at least from the point of view of conservatives, and ended up Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. And the other was Lewis Powell, who also did a very good job. So, you know, there's that. But she also does have extensive experience in and around the Supreme Court. She certainly understands the court. She was a clerk for her hero and mentor Thurgood Marshall, who arguably is, you know, one of the most progressive and best members of the United States Supreme Court, at least in the last generation or two. And currently, she is the highest Obama administration official who routinely presents, as Solicitor General, presents the administration's positions to the court. Now, back when she was appointed as Solicitor General and the Senate held its confirmation hearings, 7 Republicans actually voted to confirm her, although now that the entire Republican Party is in their 2010 election mode and routinely trying to obstruct everything that Obama does, no matter how innocuous, expect vicious attacks on her from both right and far-right commentators, excuse me, and Republican senators looking for hard-right voters in the upcoming elections. Kagan's record has some to both horrify and some to please those of us on the left. But the reality is that she hasn't spent any time on the bench issuing opinions, so it's hard to know where her heart really is. She has a long record of doing her job, whether it's running Harvard or defending her president's positions that seem to extend many Bush policies, tragically. But that's her job. But already her undergraduate thesis, this was the final paper that she wrote in her senior year at Princeton University on socialism, on the history of socialism in New York from 1900 to 1933, which seems in part to praise socialism, is being hit hard by Reich activists like Glenn Beck to allege that she's a sleeper socialist of some sort. Is Elena Kagan, a sleeper socialist? If so, she has my vote. Here's cut 6, Jacob. Here's what Glenn Beck had to say on his radio program this morning. They've already done the opposition research. They've already found her undergraduate thesis. They've already picked it apart. And Glenn Beck actually did a great job of highlighting why I think she'd make a great candidate.
In her thesis, she writes, "In our times, a coherent socialist movement is nowhere to be found in the United States." This is 30 years ago. "Americans are more likely to speak of a golden past than a golden future, of capitalism's glories than of socialism's greatness. Conformity overrides dissent. The desire to conserve has overwhelmed the urge to alter. Such a state of affairs cries out for explanation. Why, in a society by no means perfect, has a radical party never attained the status of a major political force? Why, in particular, did the socialist movement never become an alternative to the nation's established parties?" Then she issues a call to action. Her call for socialists to unite in order to, quote, defeat the entrenched foe. She writes, quote, "Through its own internal feuding, the Socialist Party has exhausted itself forever and further reduced labor radicalism in New York to the position of marginality and insignificance from which it never has recovered. The story is sad, but also a chastening one for those who, for more than half a century after socialism's decline, still wish to change America. Radicals have often succumbed to the devastating bane of sectarianism. It is easier, after all, to fight one's fellows than it is to battle an entrenched and powerful foe. Yet if history of local New York shows anything, it is that American radicals cannot afford to become their worst enemies. In unity lies their only hope."
Yeah! Somehow it takes Glenn Beck to point out to us that maybe we have a lot to hope for in Elena Kagan. Her point that those who would hope for a better America need to band together and need to work together. You know, keep in mind the significance of this. Botany has a brilliant post over at Democratic Underground today that really summarizes this. Now, it's in the context of the Gulf oil spill. I think it was posted before the Kagan nomination was presented, but it really points out the importance of the Supreme Court. Botany says, who do we really have to thank for the oil spill in the Gulf? And talks about how Justices Rehnquist, Scott, Thomas, Scalia, O'Connor, and Kennedy decided Bush v. Gore, which even though Al Gore got more votes in Florida, a fact that was confirmed by the newspapers a year later when they actually counted the votes, no matter what standard was used, the New York Times said, no matter what standard was used, Al Gore got more votes in Florida than George W. Bush. But by stopping that count, the Supreme Court handed the presidency to George W. Bush in 2000. And thus, had those five crazies on the Supreme Court not been there, had there not been this Republican majority, now, Elena Kagan is not going to change the Republican majority, but the hope is, and Elliot Spitzer was talking about this morning on the news shows, that she can influence Kennedy, who's kind of the swing vote, who's been taken under the arm, under the shoulder, under the wing of Justice Roberts ever since Roberts came on. In fact, Roberts cajoled Kennedy or forced Kennedy to write the opinion in Citizens United so he could do his dirty work, for him. But that Roberts might become the swing vote again if Elena Kagan actually is as influential and competent as she is. So had the court not been a right-wing court in 2000, we wouldn't have had Bush v. Gore. If we didn't have Bush v. Gore, Dick Cheney wouldn't have had his energy task force deciding that blowout preventers at $500,000 a piece, acoustically coupled blowout preventers, are too expensive, and there would never have been an oil spill. There never would have been 9/11. There wouldn't have been a war in Afghanistan. There wouldn't have been a war in Iraq. No spying, no torture, and on it goes.